Hi, welcome back to Elite Literary Book Group. I'm Rachel Beck. This over here is Sir Oliver. After Oliver Twist, he too was adopted. But at any rate, okay, so I'm going to start with chapter 19. And before I start talking about it, it really goes right into Tom's testimony. So I'll read that first and then discuss it. And he says that he was 25 years of age, he was married, he had 3 children. And Atticus asks if he's ever been in trouble with the law. Now, why would Atticus do this? Why would he want to bring it up? Well, in debate, this is making a concession, which is something that you want to do because you know your opponent is going to make this point. So you better make it first and square it away and say, okay, we admit this. And it was disorderly conduct, and he got into a fight. A man tried to cut him, and he said, did he succeed? He said, yes, sir, a little, but not enough to hurt. You see, he moved his left shoulder. You were both convicted? Yes, sir, I had to serve because I couldn't pay the fine. And you know, this was a man that attacked Tom Robinson, but as you see already in the justice system here, it doesn't quite matter. He got in trouble too. It's like, well, you're probably guilty of something. So they both got in trouble. Okay, so he has that on his record, 1 strike against him. Actually, he has more than 1 strike against him, but oh. Okay, were you acquainted with Mayella Ewell? Asked Atticus. Yes, sir, I passed her place going from my field every day. Whose field? He said, I pick for Link D's. You were picking cotton in November? No, sir, I was working in the yard. And he started getting acquainted with him, and he's basically establishing, so you had to pass the Ewell's place to get to your job, and there's no other way. And he says, no, there's nothing that I know of that I can. Okay, so this meeting is inevitable. Tom, did she ever speak to you? Why, yes, sir. I tipped my hat when I would come by, and one day she asked me to come inside the fence and bust up a ship rope for her. When did she ask you to chop up a ship rope? Mr. Finch, that was way last spring. I remember it because it was chopping time and I had my hoe with me. I said I really couldn't do anything. And she said that she had a hatchet for him and that he did it. And that was over a year ago. Did you ever go to the place again? Yes, sir. When? Well, I went lots of times. Judge Taylor almost picks up to make an objection, but he doesn't have to. Under what circumstances? Please, sir? Why did you go inside the fence lots of times? Tom Robinson's forehead relaxed. And notice he seems very relaxed, and because he's just telling what happened. She called me in. It seemed like every time I passed, she'd have a little something for me to do. Chopping, killing, toting water for her. She watered those red flowers every day. Were you paid for your services? No, sir. Not after she offered me a nickel the first time. I was glad to do it. Mr. Ewell didn't seem to help her none, and neither did the other children. I know she had no nickels to spare. Where were the other children? They was always about all over the place. They'd watch me work, some of them. Would Miss Mayella talk to you? Yes, sir, she'd talk to me. As Tom Robinson gave his testimony, it became clear to me that Mayella must have been the loneliest person in the world. And I talked about this in the last video, that Atticus kind of builds up her credibility, and now he's building up Tom's. He's a decent, honest, working man. And he's helping Mayella when he passes by. But of course, this is going to be used against him with Mr. Giller. As the saying going, no good deed goes unpunished. So anyways, they established this. This is something that happens all the time, which is something Mayella is already established for, is that she invites him in. And this is something that Scout says that it becomes very clear that Tom wouldn't have dared just gone over there on his own without being invited. He just didn't do that back then. And they're sort of establishing this is the relationship. She is the initiator. And so he says, Tom, what happened to you the evening? Now, what happened to her? What happened to you? And so Tom is going to have to tell a very tough story that's going to be hard for him to tell. And he's got to be very careful about how he tells it because he already knows how he's being judged. He says, well, I was going home as usual, and I passed the Ewell's place. And I didn't know why it was so quiet. I was studying why I just passed him, and she asked me to come and help her a minute. Well, I went in the fence and looked around for some kindling to work on, but I didn't see none, so she said, no, I have something for you in the house. The old door's off the hinges, and the fall's coming on pretty fast. I said, you got a screwdriver, Mayella? She said she sure had. So I went up and she motioned me to come inside, and I went in the front room, looked at the door. I said, Miss Mayella, this door look all right. I pulled it back and forth, and it looked all right. So I'm kind of making this a little bit quicker. And he noticed, it came to him, why weren't the children on the place? Why was it so quiet? So he asked her, where are all the children? And then he started to, you could see, she says, Tom's black velvet skin began to shine, and he ran his hand over his face. And she was sort of laughing. She says, they all gone to town for ice cream, she said. Took me slap a year to save 7 nickels, but I done it, and they all gone to town. Tom's discomfort was not from the humidity. What did you say then, Tom? I said something like, why, Miss Mayella, that was right smart of you to treat him. And she said, do you think so? I don't think she understood what I was thinking. I meant it was smart for her to save her money like that and nice of her to treat him. I understand you, Tom. Go on. Well, I said, I best be going. I couldn't do nothing for her. And she said, oh, yes, you can. And he asked about a ship rope, and she asked him to get up on this chair and lift something down. So I done what she told me, and I was reaching when the next thing I knew, she grabbed me around the legs. Grabbed me around the legs, Mr. Finch. She scared me so bad I hopped off and turned the chair over. That was the only furniture disturbed in the room, Mr. Finch, when I left it. Swear before God. What happened after you turned the chair over? Tom Robinson had come to a dead stop. He glanced at Atticus, and then at the jury, and then at Mr. Underwood sitting across the room. Tom, you've sworn to tell the whole truth. Will you tell it? Tom ran a hand nervously over his mouth. What happened after that? Answer the question, said Judge Taylor. Mr. Finch, I got off the chair, turned around, and she sort of jumped on me. Jumped on you violently? No, sir, she hugged me. She hugged me around the waist. This time the gravel did have to go down. People are going, ah! Then what did she do? The witness swallowed hard. She reached up and kissed me inside of my face. She said she never kissed a grown man before, and she might as well kiss a nigger. She said what her papa does to her don't count. She said, kiss me back, nigger. I said, Miss Mayla, let me out of here. And I tried to run, but she got in front of the door, and I'd have to push her. I didn't want to harm her, Mr. Finch. And I said, let me pass. But just when I said it, Mr. Ewell yonder hollered through the window. What did he say? Tom Robinson swallowed again. His eyes widened. Something not fit to say. Not fit in front of these folks and these children here. What did he say, Tom? You must tell the jury what he said. He said, you goddamn whore, I'll kill you. Then what happened? Mr. Finch, I was running so fast I didn't know what happened. Tom, did you rape me, Ella Ewell? I did not, sir. Did you harm her in any way? I did not, sir. Did you resist her advances? Mr. Finch, I tried. I tried without being ugly to her. I didn't want to be ugly. I didn't want to push her. Okay, so now here comes the problem. He's running. He looks guilty. And Atticus, knows this is going to come up and says, "Why were you running?" And he gives probably the best answer you could possibly give. He said, "Mr. Finch, if you was a nigger like me, you'd run too." And that's just not as I've done something wrong. You know, that's as I know what's going to happen now. I know what's going to happen to me. And so in his testimony, it certainly seems to stick with the facts of why Mayella, given what Mr. Ewell says to Mayella, he calls her a whore. And that would probably explain why he also beat her, because he knows initially what happened. But somehow he's finding some kind of advantage in this. And so at some point, the person he picks for Link D's rose up and said, "I just want the whole lot of you to know one thing. That boy's worked for me for 8 years, and I ain't had a speck of trouble from him. Not a speck." Now, this is something you can't do in court. Everything needs to be on the record. So Judge Taylor says, "Shut your mouth. I don't want to have to hear this trial again." Because if you have a mistrial, then everything, anything that complicates the case can throw it off. So there are reasons why things are as they are in the court. And it has to be done very orderly. So let's go to Mr. Gilmer for cross-examination. He starts with, you're a criminal, you've been to jail. "You were given 30 days for disorderly conduct?" "Yes, sir." "What'd the nigger look like after you got through with him?" "He beat me, Mr. Gilmer." "Yeah, but you were convicted, weren't you?" Atticus raised his head. "It was a misdemeanor. It's on the record, Judge." I thought he sounded tired. "Witness will answer, though," Judge Taylor said wearily. "Yes, sir, I got 30 days. I knew that Mr. Gilmer would sincerely tell the jury that anyone who was convicted of disorderly conduct could have easily taken advantage of Mayella. "Robinson, you're pretty good at busting up ship ropes and kindling wood with one hand, aren't you?" "Yes, sir, I reckon so." "Strong enough to choke the breath out of a woman and sling her to the floor?" "I've never done that, sir." "But you're strong enough to." "Reckon so, sir." "You had your eye on this one a long time, hadn't you, boy?" "No, sir, I never looked at her." "Then you mighty polite do all that chopping and hauling for her, weren't you, boy?" "I was just trying to help her, 'cause nobody seemed to help her out." "That's mighty generous of you, and you had your own chores at home to do. Why didn't you do them instead of hers?" "I did them both, sir." And every time Robinson answers, it's a very concise and honest. It's no whining in his voice. He doesn't overly do it. Because I think there is just a strength in telling the truth. I think it actually calms you down, whereas lying does the opposite. I have some theory about what truth is, and that it must be in some way kind of, God and truth must be kind of the same thing because of this, because of the way we physically respond. But anyways, I won't go into that. I won't do that to you. So anyways, he treats him, patronizing, calls him boy. And, really he's reminding the jury what this is all about. And it's, like I said before, it's all about superiority. And you'll see why in just a second. So, "Why are you so anxious to do a woman's chores?" And he says, "Well, there's nobody to help her." And then he makes a fatal mistake. He's picking at him. You're just a mighty nice fella. You did all that, not even for a penny." And he says, "Yes, sir, I felt right sorry for her." You felt sorry for her? You felt sorry for her. Okay, so this is the problem. Because this is not just about Tom Robinson. This is about a culture. This is about a community. He's just the martyr in this. He's just the victim. But if anything in these last few years have shown us, that it's not really the event itself. It's the interpretation that people put on the event. What side is the right side going to take? What side is the left side going to take? And it just seems like people don't have a whole lot of sense to say, well, let me just think about how I feel about this and think, I don't know, independently, something like that. But this is tribal behavior. It's tribal thinking. So if he points out that Tom Robinson, which he is making a much better case for his character, much more credible than the other folks who've been on the stand, there's a problem with that too. So you see, Tom Robinson is screwed no matter what he does. No matter when she brings this up later that, you know, he was a dead man the moment Mayella opened her mouth and screamed. Because there's nothing he could do. He couldn't be ugly to her. He couldn't push her. He couldn't fight her. He couldn't fight Mr. Yule. He couldn't do anything. And now he can't even say the truth. He's not allowed to feel sorry for her. He's not allowed to be a human being. And especially not a superior Christian human being, because then that just puts everybody else down a notch. That's how important this is. And what's crazy is it's still like that. So it's not about Tom Robinson. And to put this in context in studying literature and why we study literature, people are very hung up on details and wonder, why do they have to read this book? What difference does it make if they know this story? Well, that particular story might not be that important, but it's not about that. It's about all of us. It's about humanity. And the more you understand it, the more you kind of come to understand yourself and are able to start thinking independently. It's not like you're going to be trapped into thinking one way or that way. A very educated person is someone who kind of can step back a little bit and make up his or her own mind about certain issues. But there's so much groupthink, and it's that really hasn't gone away, right? And so there's nothing new under the sun, as Solomon said. So we get back into this, and he goes after him a little bit more about being scared, because obviously that is a sign of guilt. Or before that, when she says you came in here to bust up a ship rope. No, sir, it ain't. Then you're saying she's lying? This is even more problematic. And he says, she's not lying. I'm saying that she's confused in her mind. He's trying very hard to not upset anyone, but he's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. Didn't Mr. Yule run you off the place, boy? No, sir, I don't think he did. Meaning, I don't think Mr. Yule ran at all. I think Mr. Yule was in the house beating his daughter. Don't think, what do you mean? I didn't stay long enough for him to run me off. You're very candid about this. Why'd you run so fast? Like I said, I was scared. If you had a clear conscience, why were you scared? Like I said before, it wasn't safe for any nigger to be in a fix like that. But you weren't in a fix. You testified you were resisting Miss Yule. So were you so scared she'd hurt you? You ran, big buck like you? No, sir, I'm scared I'd be in court, just like I am now. Scared of arrest? Scared you'd have to own up to what you did? No, sir. Scared I'd have to own up to what I didn't do. His statements are about as parallel as Atticus's. In the last scene when Atticus is doing the cross-examination, and Mayella says, you want me to say something that didn't happen? No, I want you to say something that did happen. And see, so there's this clarity that they have. And then suddenly, Dill, kind of the scene fades out. We don't really know exactly what else was said. And Dill is feeling sick and needs to go outside. And I'll start with that, because even though it's at the end of the chapter, it kind of goes into chapter 20 next time. All right. Thanks for listening.